All around the world, across dry deserts, thick jungles, and even deep under the ocean, there are massive ancient structures that continue to amaze scientists. These sites contain stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons, pillars aligned with extremely high accuracy, and large cities planned using advanced knowledge of astronomy that does not match the known abilities of the time. These are ancient megastructures that archaeologists still cannot fully explain. From the icy regions of Siberia to the pyramids of Egypt, each location presents an unsolved problem. The details left behind by the people who built these structures remain difficult for modern experts to interpret. Who created these structures? By what methods were they built? And what purpose did they serve? Stonehenge is an ancient stone monument located on Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, England, about 2 miles west of the town of Amesbury. It was built thousands of years ago and is one of the most recognisable prehistoric structures in the world. The outer circle is made up of huge upright sarsen stones. Each of these stones is about 13 feet tall, around 7 feet wide, and weighs roughly 25 tons. Large horizontal stones called lintels are placed on top, and they fit securely because the builders use special joints known as mortise and tenon joints. This method of connecting stones is extremely rare for structures from that time. Inside the main circle is a smaller ring of blue stones, and deeper inside stand even larger pairs of upright stones joined by one lintel, known as trilithons. Although Stonehenge is now partly ruined, its alignment still shows great planning. The entire structure is positioned so that the sun rises directly over it on the summer solstice and sets in a specific position on the winter solstice. The stones sit inside a series of earthworks, and the area around Stonehenge contains the highest concentration of Neolithic and Bronze Age sites in all of England, including hundreds of burial mounds. The building of Stonehenge took place in several stages over an extremely long period of time. The earliest part of the site, the circular earth bank and ditch, was built around 3,100 years before the birth of Christ. The famous sarsen stone circle was added much later, between about 2,600 and 2,400 years before the birth of Christ. The blue stones were likely rearranged several times, with radiocarbon tests showing that they stood in their present positions between about 2,400 and 2,200 years before the birth of Christ. However, the stones may have been brought to the site as early as 3,000 years before the birth of Christ. Stonehenge is one of the most well-known landmarks in the entire United Kingdom and is considered a strong symbol of British history and culture. It received legal protection in the year 1882, when one of the first laws to protect ancient monuments was passed. In the year 1986, Stonehenge and the surrounding landscape were officially added to the list of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Today, the site is owned by the British Crown Estate, while English Heritage manages it. The land around it belongs to the National Trust. Research suggests that Stonehenge may have been used as a burial site from the very beginning of its construction. Human remains found in the earth banks and ditches date back to as early as 3,000 years before the birth of Christ, and burials continued for at least 500 more years. The name Stonehenge has a long and interesting history. Early writings from the 10th and 11th centuries describe the stones as being supported in the air. In the year 1740, the antiquarian William Stukeley wrote that large hanging rocks in Yorkshire were called henges, and he believed the name Stonehenge came from Old English words meaning hanging stones or hinged stones. Later researchers suggested the name may come from words meaning stone and gallows, referring to the way the lintels rest across the upright stones. The word henge has since been used by archaeologists to describe a type of ancient monument that includes a circular area surrounded by a raised bank and an inner ditch. Stonehenge became the most famous example of this type of monument, even though the details of its structure are more complex than most. Archaeologists, including Mike Parker Pearson from the Stonehenge Riverside Project, have found evidence showing that the site developed over at least 1,500 years. In fact, when the wider landscape is included, the history of activity may stretch back about 6,500 years. The early history of the site is difficult to study because the natural chalk ground was disturbed over time by freezing conditions, animal activity, and poor quality excavation work done centuries ago. Despite the challenges, a generally accepted timeline exists based on scientific dating. One remarkable discovery includes several large Mesolithic post holes found beneath what used to be the visitor car park. These post holes date back to around 8,000 years before the birth of Christ. Each hole once held a huge pine post about 2.5 feet wide, which eventually rotted away. Some of these posts were placed in an east-west line, which may have held ritual meaning. Another ancient astronomical site in Britain, located in Aberdeenshire and known as Warren Field, is believed to be the oldest lunar solar calendar in the world. It was adjusted every year by observing the midwinter sunrise. Similar sites from later periods have also been discovered in Scandinavia. A settlement from the same period has been found at Blickmead, a natural spring located about 1 mile from Stonehenge, which may have supported human activity year-round. Salisbury Plain was still heavily forested during this early period. About 4,000 years later, during the early Neolithic era, people built a causewayed enclosure known as Robin Hood's Ball, along with several long barrow tombs in the surrounding landscape. Around 3,500 years before the birth of Christ, a long earthwork known as the Stonehenge Cursus was built about 2,300 feet north of the site. As the first farmers arrived and began clearing the land, more structures appeared. Some wooden or stone features along with burial mounds may date back to as early as 4,000 years before the birth of Christ. Charcoal from the Blickmead area supports this timeline. Researchers from the University of Buckingham believe that people may have lived in this landscape for many generations, possibly for several thousand years, making it one of the most important places in the long history of Stonehenge. The earliest part of the monument began as a wide circular enclosure made from a bank and a ditch. It was built using soft white Seaford chalk from the late Cretaceous period, specifically the Santonian age. This circular structure measured roughly 360 feet in width, or a little over 100 metres. It had a large entrance on the northeastern side and a much smaller one on the south side. When it was first created, it stood alone in open grassland on land that gently sloped downward. During this first building phase, the people who worked on the site placed the bones of deer and oxen at the bottom of the ditch, along with flint tools that had been shaped by hand. Interestingly, these animal bones were already quite old before they were placed there. They were older than the antler picks used to dig the ditch, showing that the people who buried them had kept and cared for these bones for a long time before finally placing them into the earth. The ditch was one continuous circle, but it had been dug in separate sections, much like the ditches seen in earlier causewayed enclosures found elsewhere in the region. The chalk removed from the ditch was then heaped up to form the surrounding bank. Archaeologists date this first construction stage to around 3,100 years before the start of the Common Era. After it was completed, the ditch slowly began to fill in naturally over time. Just inside the boundary of the enclosure, the builders created a ring of 56 round pits, each a little over 3 feet wide. These pits are known as the Aubrey Holes, named after John Aubrey, a 17th century antiquarian who was once thought to have been the first person to record them. Together these pits, along with the bank and ditch, form what is called the palisade or gate ditch. Some experts believe these pits may once have held wooden posts, forming a kind of timber circle, though no remains of such posts have been found. A more recent excavation has suggested another possibility. The pits might originally have held small bluestones. If that is true, it would mean that the very first stone structure at the monument was built around 500 years earlier than previously believed. In the year 2013, a team of archaeologists led by Mike Parker Pearson studied more than 50,000 cremated bone fragments belonging to 63 individuals buried at the site. These remains had originally been placed separately in the Aubrey Holes, but in the year 1920, archaeologist William Hawley dug them up. Thinking they were not important, he gathered them together and reburied them all in a single location, known as Aubrey Hole No. 7, in the year 1935. Scientific tests on these bones later revealed that the cremated individuals were almost evenly split between men and women. Some were even children. There were signs that the chalk layer beneath the original graves had been pressed down by a heavy weight, which led the researchers to believe that the first bluestones brought from Wales may have been used as markers for the graves. Radiocarbon testing of the human remains also showed that the site is around 500 years older than earlier estimates, pushing the date back to roughly 3,000 years before the start of the Common Era. A study carried out in the year 2018 examined the strontium content of the bones and found that many of these people had probably grown up near the original source of the bluestones in Wales, and had not lived near Stonehenge for long before their deaths. Between the years 2017 and 2021, Parker Pearson and his team presented new research suggesting that the bluestones used in Stonehenge had originally stood in another stone circle in Wales. This earlier circle, located at Warn Morn in the Preseli Hills, appears to have been almost exactly the same size as Stonehenge's earlier stone arrangement, measuring about 360 feet, or around 110 metres across. It too once contained bluestones, and one stone that had been removed from that circle showed clear evidence of being reused at Stonehenge. Its unusual five-sided shape and soil dating from its original pit helped identify it. Tests showed that the Welsh circle was put up somewhere between around 3,400 and 3,200 years before the start of the Common Era and was taken apart roughly 300 to 400 years later. These dates match the time period when Stonehenge's stones were first set up. The sudden stop of human activity in the Welsh area at the same time suggests that the people may have moved away, possibly taking their stones with them, although some bluestones may have come from other places as well. The second major phase of construction at Stonehenge took place between about 2,900 and 2,600 years before the Common Era. Numerous post holes from this period show that a timber structure of some kind was built inside the enclosure. Additional wooden posts were also placed at the northeast entrance, and a line of posts extended inward from the southern entrance. These post holes were smaller than the Aubrey holes, being only about 16 inches wide, and they were spaced much less evenly. During this period, the builders deliberately reduced the height of the bank, and the ditch continued to fill in with natural silt. At least 25 of the Aubrey holes later contained cremation burials from the following 2 centuries. Whatever their original purpose had been, they began to serve as burial places during this second phase. Around 30 more cremations were discovered in the ditch and in other parts of the monument, mostly on the eastern side. This means that Stonehenge functioned as an enclosed cremation cemetery at that time, making it the earliest known cremation cemetery in the entire British Isles. Pieces of unburnt human bone were also discovered within the layers that had filled the ditch. Archaeologists determined the age of this phase with the help of late Neolithic grooved-ware pottery found along with the burial features. Archaeological excavations suggest that around 2,600 years before the Common Era, the builders of the site shifted from using timber to using stone. At the centre of the site, they dug 2 rings of holes, now known as the Q&R holes. These stone sockets are only partially preserved today, so based on current evidence, they are sometimes described as forming crescent shapes. However, it is possible that they originally formed a complete double ring. There is little concrete evidence to accurately date this phase, but it is believed that the holes once held as many as 80 standing stones, although only 43 of these can be identified today. It is widely accepted that some of these stones, called bluestones, were made from dolerite, a type of igneous rock, and were transported by humans over a long distance. The stones likely came from the Preseli Hills, about 150 miles away in what is now Pembrokeshire, Wales. An alternative theory suggested that glaciers carried the stones closer to the site, but there is no evidence that glacial deposits reached southern central England. In 2019, researchers reported finding evidence of megalithic quarrying in Wales at sites identified as sources of Stonehenge's bluestones. This suggests that humans quarried the stones, rather than them being moved by glaciers. Support for the human transport theory increased in 2011 when a megalithic bluestone quarry was discovered at Craig Rossi Phelan near Crymych in Pembrokeshire. This quarry is thought to have supplied some of the stones used at the site. Other stones at the monument may have been smaller sarsens, a type of sandstone, which were later used as horizontal lintels. The stones weighed approximately 2 tons each, and may have been moved by lifting and carrying them on rows of poles or within rectangular wooden frameworks, similar to techniques historically recorded in China, Japan, and India. It is still uncertain whether the stones were transported directly from their quarries to Salisbury Plain, or whether they were first part of an earlier stone circle in the Preseli Hills and then relocated. Some scholars suggest this relocation might have been intended to connect 2 sacred places, unite different regions politically, or reinforce the identity of migrants moving from one area to another. Excavations at Warn Morn, near the Preseli Hills, have revealed evidence of a stone circle measuring around 110 metres in diameter. This circle may have contained some or all of the bluestones later used at Stonehenge. One of the holes found at Warn Morn matches the unusual cross-section of a Stonehenge bluestone so closely that it has been described as fitting like a key in a lock. Each of these monoliths is roughly 6.5 feet tall, between 3.5 and 5 feet wide, and about 2.5 feet thick. The stone now called the altar stone is believed to have originally come from the Seni beds, possibly located about 50 miles east of the Preseli Hills in the Brecon Beacons. However, a study announced in 2024 by a team from Curtin University analysed fragments that had fallen from the altar stone and found that their chemical composition best matches rocks from the Orcadian Basin in northeastern Scotland, which includes Caithness, Orkney, and the Moray Firth regions. This implies that the stone was transported roughly 430 miles, highlighting unexpected cultural connections between southern England and northern Scotland. During this period, the northeastern entrance of the monument was widened so that it precisely aligned with the rising sun at midsummer and the setting sun at midwinter. This phase of construction was never fully completed, but it appears that the smaller standing stones were removed and the Q and R holes were deliberately filled in. The heel stone, a sandstone from the Tertiary period, may also have been placed just outside the northeastern entrance at this time, though it cannot be dated accurately and may have been installed at any point during this phase. Originally, it was accompanied by a second stone, which no longer survives. Inside the northeastern entrance, 2 or 3 large portal stones were set up, although only one remains today, the fallen slaughter stone measuring 16 feet long. Other features dating to this phase include the 4 station stones, 2 of which were positioned atop mounds or barrows, even though these mounds do not contain burials. Finally, Stonehenge Avenue, consisting of a parallel pair of ditches and banks stretching roughly 2 miles to the River Avon, was also created during this period. During the next major stage of activity at Stonehenge, 30 massive sarsen stones, dating from the Oligocene to Miocene periods, were transported to the site. These enormous stones, shown in grey on site plans, were brought from a quarry located approximately 16 miles, or 26 kilometres, to the north in West Woods, Wiltshire. Once at the site, the stones were carefully shaped and dressed. The builders even used mortise and tenon joints, a woodworking technique, to prepare them for assembly. These 30 sarsen stones were then erected in a circular formation, roughly 98 feet, or 30 metres across. Along the top, 30 horizontal lintel stones were positioned to complete the circle. Each lintel was connected to the next using tongue and groove joints, another method borrowed from carpentry. Each standing stone measured about 13.5 feet, or 4.11 metres, in height 7 feet, or 2.13 metres, in width, and 3.5 feet, or 1.06 metres, in depth, with an average weight of around 26 tons. The stones were meticulously shaped to create specific visual effects. The uprights subtly widened toward the top to maintain consistent perspective when viewed from the ground, while the lintels curved slightly to echo the circular shape of the original monument. The inward-facing surfaces of the stones were smoothed and finely worked, while the outer faces were left rougher. On average, each stone was about 3.6 feet, or 1.1 metres, thick, and the gaps between them measured roughly 3.3 feet, or 1 metre. To complete the entire circle and the horseshoe-shaped arrangement of trilithons, a total of 75 stones would have been required, 60 for the outer circle and 15 for the trilithon horseshoe. For some time it was thought that the ring might have been left unfinished, but during an exceptionally dry summer in 2013, patches of parched grass appeared that may correspond to the missing stones. Each lintel stone measured approximately 10 feet, or 3.2 metres, long, 3.3 feet, or 1 metre, wide, and 2.6 feet, or 0.8 of a metre, thick. The tops of the lintels stood about 16 feet, or 4.9 metres, above the ground. Within this circle, 5 trilithons of carefully dressed sarsen stones were arranged in a horseshoe shape, 45 feet, or 13.7 metres, across, with the open end facing northeast. These colossal stones, 10 upright supports and 5 lintels, each weighed up to 50 tons and were joined using intricate jointing techniques. They were arranged symmetrically, with the smallest pair standing around 20 feet, or 6 metres, tall, the next pair slightly taller, and the largest single trilithon, located in the southwest corner, reaching about 24 feet, or 7.3 metres, in height. Today, only one upright of the Great Trilithon remains standing, with 22 feet, or 6.7 metres, visible above ground and nearly 8 feet, or 2.4 metres, buried below. Some of the stones feature carvings, including images of a dagger and 14 axe heads on stone 53. Additional axe head carvings can be seen on the outer faces of stones 3, 4 and 5. While it is difficult to precisely date these carvings, their shape is similar to weapons from the Late Bronze Age. Laser scanning in the early 21st century has supported this interpretation. The pair of trilithons in the northeast is the smallest at around 20 feet, or 6 meters in height, while the largest trilithon, situated in the southwest of the horseshoe, stands nearly 25 feet, or 7.5 meters, tall. Radiocarbon dating places this ambitious phase of construction between 2600 and 2400 BC, slightly earlier than the Stonehenge archer, who was discovered in the outer ditch of the monument in 1978, and also predates the two burial groups known as the Amesbury Archer and the Boscombe Bowman, found about 3 miles, or 5 kilometers to the west. Analysis of animal teeth recovered 2 miles, or 3 kilometers, away at Durrington Walls, the so-called Builders' Camp, indicates that during this period, as many as 4,000 people may have gathered at the site for midwinter and midsummer festivals. The evidence suggests that the animals used in the feast had been slaughtered around 9 months or 15 months after their spring birth. Strontium isotope analysis shows that some of the animals were brought from distant regions, including the Scottish Highlands. Around the same time, a large timber circle and a second avenue were constructed at Durrington Walls, overlooking the River Avon. This wooden circle was aligned to face the rising sun at the midwinter solstice, opposite to Stonehenge's solar alignments, while the avenue ran from the river to the timber circle and aligned with the setting sun at the summer solstice. Evidence of enormous fires along the banks of the Avon between the avenues suggests the two sites were connected, possibly serving as a procession route on the longest and shortest days of the year. Archaeologist Mike Parker Pearson has proposed that the timber circle represented the land of the living, while the stone circle symbolised the land of the dead, with the River Avon forming a journey between the two. During the later part of the Bronze Age, the exact details of the activities at Stonehenge remain unclear, but evidence suggests that the blue stones were re-erected during this period. These stones were placed within the outer circle of massive sarsen stones and may have been shaped or trimmed in some way. Like the sarsens, a few of the blue stones bear cuts similar to those made in timber working, hinting that they might have been connected to horizontal lintels and formed part of a larger structural design. Over time, the blue stones were rearranged once again. Some were positioned in a circle between the two rings of sarsens, while others were set in an oval at the centre of the inner ring. Some archaeologists believe that a second group of stones may have been brought from Wales during this phase. All the stones were placed as upright pillars with clear spacing, without any of the horizontal lintels that are suggested in the later Stonehenge 3 Phase 3 Stage 3. The altar stone may also have been moved and stood upright within the central oval. Despite the scale of these changes, this phase, known as Stonehenge 3 Phase 4, was not as precisely constructed as the previous work. Many of the newly re-erected blue stones were poorly founded and began to topple over, and after this stage, only minor modifications were made. Soon after, the northeastern section of the bluestone circle from Phase 4 was removed, leaving a horseshoe-shaped arrangement known as the bluestone horseshoe. This layout mirrored the shape of the central sarsen trilithons. This phase occurred at the same time as the construction of the Seahenge site in Norfolk. The final known constructions at Stonehenge are the Y and Z holes, built around 1600 years before the Common Era. They were probably last used during the Iron Age. Roman coins and medieval objects have also been discovered in and around the monument, but it is unclear whether Stonehenge was continuously in use throughout British prehistory, or how it was used at different times. Nearby, the massive Iron Age hill fort known as Vespasian's Camp, despite its name, not a Roman site, was built alongside the avenue near the River Avon. In addition, in 1923, archaeologists uncovered the decapitated remains of a 7th century Saxon man at the site. Scholars have known about Stonehenge since the Middle Ages, and it has been studied, visited and interpreted by many groups ever since. Stonehenge was built by a culture that left no written records, so many questions about its construction and purpose remain unanswered. Various myths surround the stones. The monument, including the Great Trilithon, the horseshoe arrangement of the 5 central trilithons, the heel stone, and the embanked avenue, is aligned with the sunset of the winter solstice and the sunrise of the summer solstice. A natural landform at the site follows this alignment, and it may have inspired the builders. Some researchers suggest that the monument also served as a celestial observatory, capable of predicting eclipses, solstices, equinoxes, and other important celestial events. Excavated animal bones suggest that people may have gathered at Stonehenge during the winter months rather than the summer. Little direct evidence exists to show exactly how the builders moved and erected the stones. Over time, some writers have suggested that supernatural or anachronistic methods were involved, arguing that the stone's enormous weight made them impossible to move otherwise. However, experiments have shown that conventional Neolithic techniques, such as using shear legs, sledges, and rolling logs, could successfully transport stones of similar size. For instance, in 1995, a team of more than 100 people moved a 40-ton slab of stone 18 miles from the Marlborough Downs using a sled and grease. The purpose of Stonehenge has been debated for decades. Some suggest it was an astronomical observatory. In the 1960s, Gerald Hawkins described how the site was aligned to track the movements of the sun and moon over a 56-year cycle. Other researchers, including Geoffrey Wainwright and Timothy Darvill, proposed that Stonehenge was a place of healing, similar to a prehistoric Lourdes, which could explain the high number of burials and evidence of injuries among the dead. They also believed the site was multifunctional and used for ancestor worship. Isotope studies show that some of the people buried at Stonehenge came from far away. A teenage boy buried around 1500 years before the Common Era had grown up near the Mediterranean. A metalworker from 2300 years before the Common Era called the Amesbury Archer came from the Alpine foothills of Germany, and a group known as the Boscombe Bowmen likely arrived from Wales or Brittany in France. Another theory, proposed by Mike Parker Pearson of Sheffield University, suggests that Stonehenge was part of a larger ritual landscape connected to Durrington Walls by avenues and the River Avon. In this view, Durrington Walls represented the living, while Stonehenge symbolised the domain of the dead. Travelling along the River Avon may have been a ceremonial journey from life to death, honouring ancestors and the recently deceased. Early interpretations of Stonehenge, going back to the 12th century with Geoffrey of Monmouth, also described its healing properties and suggested it functioned as a funerary monument. Some researchers suggest Stonehenge may have symbolised peace and unity. Evidence indicates that at the time of its construction, Britain's Neolithic communities were undergoing a period of cultural unification, and Stonehenge may have reflected that social cohesion. Despite centuries of study, the true purpose and methods behind Stonehenge remain a mystery, leaving the monument as one of the most fascinating archaeological sites in the world. Stonehenge is made up of two main types of stones, the smaller bluestones and the much larger sarsen stones. Sarsens are a type of hard sandstone naturally found in the chalk hills of southern England. The bluestones are made from various kinds of rock, including dolerite, tuff, rhyolite and sandstone. Studies suggest that the igneous bluestones, such as dolerite and rhyolite, were transported from the Preseli Hills in southwestern Wales, a journey of about 140 miles. Another notable stone, the sandstone altar stone, is thought to have originated in eastern Wales. Research published in the year 2020 shows that the massive sarsen stones were quarried at West Woods, around 16 miles away from the site. In a fascinating discovery, researchers from the Royal College of Art in London found that the igneous bluestones at Stonehenge have unusual sound properties. When struck, they create a loud, resonant ringing. Rocks like these are common along the Carnmelyn Ridge in the Preseli Hills. In fact, in the nearby village of Manclochog, whose Welsh name translates as bell or ringing stones, local bluestones were historically used as church bells until the 18th century. The research team suggested that these acoustic properties might explain why the builders transported certain bluestones over such long distances, a remarkable technical feat at the time. In many ancient cultures, stones that produced ringing sounds known as lithophonic rocks were considered to have mystical or healing powers. Stonehenge itself has long been linked with ritual activity, and the presence of these ringing stones supports the theory that the site may have been used as a place for healing, an idea proposed by archaeologist Mike Parker Pearson and supported by these studies. Evidence also shows that, although farming was introduced to the British Isles, the cultivation of cereals declined between 3,300 and 1,500 years before the Common Era. Instead, many people lived a pastoral lifestyle, focusing on gathering hazelnuts and raising pigs and cattle. Interestingly, most of Stonehenge's major construction phases occurred during this period, when large-scale cereal farming was not widespread. Similar patterns, where monumental constructions were built without extensive agriculture, are seen at other prehistoric sites such as Poverty Point in North America and Sanai Maruyama in Japan. Genetic studies of Neolithic human remains from across Britain reveal that the people who built the first two stages of Stonehenge were closely related to early farmers from Iberia and Central Europe. Their ancestry was roughly 75% from early European farmers who originally came from the eastern Mediterranean and travelled west, and 25% from western hunter-gatherers of Western Europe. These farmers moved through Iberia before eventually reaching Britain around 4,000 years before the Common Era. Their farming techniques originated from Anatolia, and their genetic mixing with local populations mainly occurred on the European continent before they arrived in Britain. When these farmers arrived, Britain was already inhabited by hunter-gatherer groups, the descendants of the first humans to settle the island after the last ice age ended around 11,700 years ago. The Neolithic farmers largely replaced these hunter-gatherers, with only limited interbreeding. Interestingly, despite their predominantly Aegean ancestry, the male lineages of these Neolithic farmers in Britain were almost entirely inherited from Western hunter-gatherers. This pattern of hunter-gatherer male dominance combined with farmer female ancestry is also seen among other megalithic building populations in northwestern Europe. This trend contributed to a resurgence of hunter-gatherer ancestry, mostly from males, across Western and Central Europe during the Middle Neolithic period. By the time the third phase of Stonehenge 3-2, was constructed between 2,600 and 2,400 years before the Common Era, a new group known as the Bell-Beaker people arrived in Britain around 2,500 years before the Common Era, migrating from mainland Europe. These two groups coexisted for roughly 500 years, and it is likely that the Bell-Beaker people incorporated the henge structures into their own beliefs and practices. The earliest British individuals associated with the Beaker culture were probably speakers of Indo-European languages, with ancestors from the Pontic-Caspian steppe. They were genetically similar to populations along the Rhine. Eventually, the arrival of the Bell-Beaker people led to a major population replacement in Britain. More than 90% of the British Neolithic gene pool was replaced, with the newcomers carrying approximately 50% ancestry from Western steppe herders. In the year 1979, archaeologist Richard J.C. Atkinson used new stratigraphical methods to challenge the theory that the Roman army had tried to destroy Stonehenge as a centre of Druidic resistance. The stone fragments he had previously thought were from Roman-era activity were reinterpreted as either material left by the original builders when dressing the stones, or from quarrying during the Middle Bronze Age. Later excavations, including a study in 2008 that combined new and earlier findings, showed that Stonehenge was indeed an active site during the Roman era. Discoveries of coins from the late 4th century, large amounts of Roman pottery, and pit-buried animal bones suggest that the site continued to hold ritual or ceremonial importance. A square-cut trench containing a bluestone slab and a Roman coin was interpreted as a grave, highlighting the lasting significance of Stonehenge across millennia. In 1926, the archaeologist William Hawley uncovered a decapitated skeleton of a man estimated to be between 28 and 32 years old. This grim discovery was made within the heart of Stonehenge, near a feature now called Y Hole 9, situated along the monument's central axis. Radiocarbon dating suggests that the burial took place sometime between 600 and 690 AD. The grave was very shallow, forcing the body to be crammed into the small space, which broke most of the ribs, while the head was placed carefully on top. Archaeologist Mike Pitts has suggested that this may have been either a ritual sacrifice or a judicial execution, showing that Stonehenge still held significance even during the Middle Ages. Pitts points to nearby post holes as evidence for a gallows, linking the site to the contemporary term henge, which meant hanging. On the other hand, Aubrey Burl argues that the name refers not to executions, but to the shape of the trilithons, which resemble structures for multiple hangings. Stonehenge and its surrounding monuments have fascinated people for centuries, attracting both antiquarians and modern archaeologists. One of the earliest to study the site scientifically was John Aubrey, who in 1666 created a detailed plan of the monument, recording the pits that are now named after him, the Aubrey Holes. In the early 18th century, William Stukely continued Aubrey's work, but also examined the surrounding landscape, including the cursus and the avenue, though his interpretations were not always accurate. Stukely excavated many nearby barrows and linked the entire landscape to the Druids, even naming certain disc barrows as Druids' barrows because of his fascination. The most precise early plan of Stonehenge was produced by John Wood, the Elder, an architect from Bath in 1740. His annotated survey, now digitally redrawn and published, captured the monument as it stood before the Southwest Trilithon collapsed in 1797 and was restored in 1958. In the early 19th century, William Cunnington conducted formal excavations of the area. He dug 24 barrows and investigated the area around the stones, uncovering charred wood, animal bones, pottery, and urns. He also identified the hole where the slaughter stone had once stood. Richard Colt Hoare collaborated with Cunnington, excavating around 379 barrows on Salisbury Plain, including approximately 200 near Stonehenge, some in partnership with William Cox. To mark their work, they left metal tokens with their initials in each barrow they opened. Many of Cunnington's discoveries are now housed in the Wiltshire Museum. Even Charles Darwin conducted experiments at Stonehenge in 1877, studying how quickly objects sink into the earth for his book on the formation of vegetable mould by worms. The first major restoration of Stonehenge was overseen by William Gowland in 1900. He straightened and set in concrete a sarsen stone that was in danger of falling, moving it roughly half a metre from its original spot. Gowland's work also included careful excavations, which revealed more about how the stones were erected than all prior investigations combined. In 1920, William Hawley returned to the site to excavate the bases of 6 stones and the outer ditch. He rediscovered Aubrey's pits inside the bank, examined concentric circular holes outside the sarsen circle known as the Y and Z holes, and even found a bottle of port wine left by Cunnington in the slaughter stone socket. In the 1940s and 1950s, Richard J.C. Atkinson, Stuart Pigott, and J.F.S. Stone re-excavated much of Hawley's work, discovering carved axes and daggers on the sarsen stones. Atkinson's research was especially important for understanding the 3 major phases of Stonehenge's construction. Stonehenge underwent further restoration in 1958, when 3 standing sarsen stones were re-erected and set in concrete bases. In 1963, after stone 23 of the sarsen circle toppled, it was re-erected and 3 additional stones were set in concrete. Later, archaeologists such as Christopher Chippendale from the University of Cambridge and Brian Edwards from the University of the West of England advocated for public awareness of the restorations, and in 2004, English Heritage included photographs of the restoration work in their book Stonehenge, A History in Photographs. Excavations continued in 1966 and 1967, led by Faith and Lance Vatcher, in preparation for a new car park. They uncovered Mesolithic post holes dating from between 7000 and 8000 BC, as well as a 10-metre-long palisade ditch, a V-shaped trench into which timber posts had been inserted, surviving until they decayed. Aerial archaeology later showed that this ditch extended from the west to the north of Stonehenge, near the avenue. In 1978, Atkinson and John Evans conducted further excavations and found the remains of the Stonehenge archer in the outer ditch. The following year, a new stone hole was discovered next to the heel stone after a cable trench was accidentally dug. In the early 1980s, Julian C. Richards led the Stonehenge Environs Project, a detailed study of the surrounding landscape, successfully dating features such as the Lesser Cursus, Conybeare Henge, and several smaller monuments. By 1993, the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee criticised the way Stonehenge had been presented to the public, calling it a national disgrace. English Heritage responded by commissioning research to summarise all archaeological work conducted at the site. This 2-year project resulted in the 1995 publication of the monograph Stonehenge in its Landscape, the first comprehensive work to present the complex layers and findings from the site, along with a revised understanding of the monument's construction phases. Between the years 2003 and 2008, a series of major excavations took place at Stonehenge, known collectively as the Stonehenge Riverside Project, led by the archaeologist Mike Parker Pearson. Unlike earlier digs that focused mainly on the stones themselves, this project explored the wider landscape and investigated how other nearby monuments connected to Stonehenge. One of the most notable discoveries was at Durrington Walls, where researchers uncovered another long straight avenue that led toward the River Avon. At the point where the Stonehenge Avenue met the river, the team revealed a previously unknown circular area. This circle appears to have once held 4 additional stones, likely marking the starting point of the avenue and hinting at a carefully planned landscape design, stretching from the river to the monument itself. In April of 2008, Tim Darvill from the University of Bournemouth and Jeff Wainwright of the Society of Antiquaries carried out a separate excavation inside the stone circle. Their goal was to recover fragments of the original bluestone pillars that could be reliably dated. They determined that some of the bluestones were erected around 2,300 years before the Common Era, though this may not represent the very first stones placed at Stonehenge. Intriguingly, they also uncovered organic material dating back to 7,000 years before the Common Era. Along with evidence from Mesolithic post holes, this confirmed that the area had been in use for at least 4,000 years before Stonehenge as we know it was even begun. Later that year, during August and September, Julian C. Richards and Mike Pitts, as part of the Riverside project, excavated Aubrey Hole 7. They carefully removed cremated human remains from several other Aubrey holes, originally excavated by William Hawley in the 1920s and reburied in 1935. The team had a license from the Ministry of Justice, granted in May of 2008, which required that the remains be kept safely, privately and decently, and that they be reinterred within 2 years. In April of 2009, a new survey of the landscape revealed a shallow mound rising about 16 inches, located between stones 54 of the inner circle and 10 of the outer circle. This mound was clearly distinct from the natural slope of the land. Earlier suggestions that it was merely leftover material from past excavations were challenged, since illustrations from the 18th and 19th centuries already depicted the mound. Some evidence even suggests that this unusual geological feature may have been deliberately incorporated into the monument from the beginning. The survey also revealed a very low circular bank, just over 4 inches high, between the Y and Z hole circles, with an additional bank inside the Z circle. These features may represent either the spread of material from the original holes or perhaps intentionally planted hedge banks to screen activities inside the site. In 2010, the Stonehenge Hidden Landscape Project identified a henge-like monument, less than 1 kilometre from the main site. This monument was later confirmed to be located at the round barrow known as Amesbury 50, part of the larger Cursus Barrows group. In November of 2011, archaeologists from the University of Birmingham reported discovering 2 enormous pits along the Stonehenge Cursus pathway. Remarkably, these pits are aligned with the position of the midsummer sunrise and sunset when viewed from the heel stone, suggesting a link between the construction and astronomical events. This discovery was made using non-invasive geophysical imaging, a technique that allows the landscape to be visualized without digging. According to the project leader Vince Gaffney, this alignment may offer direct evidence connecting ritual activities at Stonehenge with celestial observations. In December of the same year, geologists from the University of Leicester and the National Museum of Wales traced the source of some rhyolite fragments found at Stonehenge. These fragments, which did not match any standing stones or bluestone stumps, came from a rock outcrop called Craig Rossi Felin near Pont Saison in North Pembrokeshire, over 220 kilometres away from Stonehenge. The outcrop stretches over 70 metres and confirms the extraordinary lengths to which the builders went to source materials for the monument. By 2014, the University of Birmingham team announced new findings, including previously overlooked stone and wooden structures and burial mounds near Durrington, which may date as far back as 4,000 years before the Common Era. Using ground-penetrating radar, they examined an area of almost 12 square kilometres to a depth of 3 metres, revealing as many as 17 new monuments. Many of these may be late Neolithic structures resembling Stonehenge, suggesting a complex network of interconnected monuments. The study also confirmed that the Cursus track ended in 2 extremely deep pits, each about 5 metres wide, the purpose of which remains unknown. In July of 2020, a study led by David Nash from the University of Brighton confirmed that the large sarsen stones at Stonehenge are chemically identical to stones found at West Woods, near Marlborough, Wiltshire, approximately 25 kilometres to the north. By analysing a core sample taken in 1958, the team compared the stones using advanced techniques such as X-ray fluorescence spectrometry. Out of 52 sarsen stones at Stonehenge, 50 were determined to have originated from West Woods, identifying the probable source of these massive stones. Between 2017 and 2018, further excavations by Mike Parker Pearson's team at Warnmorn in the Preseli Hills revealed that the site had originally contained a massive stone circle over 110 metres in diameter, the same size as Stonehenge's original bluestone circle. It was aligned toward the midsummer solstice. Remarkably, one stone hole at Warnmorn had a distinctive pentagonal shape, closely matching a pentagonal stone at Stonehenge, suggesting the stones may have been moved from Warnmorn to Stonehenge. Soil dating using optically stimulated luminescence indicated that the stones at Warnmorn were erected between 3,400 and 3,200 years before the Common Era and removed roughly 300 to 400 years later. This timeline aligns with theories that some stones were transported and reassembled at Stonehenge, possibly supplemented with local sarsen stones. Human activity at Warnmorn ceased around the same time, leading archaeologists to suggest that people may have migrated from Warnmorn to Stonehenge, bringing the stones with them. Some researchers also propose that additional stones from other dismantled circles in the region may have been incorporated into Stonehenge. In 2021, further research carried out by Mike Parker Pearson's team revealed that the ancient stone circle at Warnmorn had never been fully completed. Of the stones that may once have stood there, no more than 13 had been removed in ancient times. That same year, in February, archaeologists announced an extraordinary discovery while excavating for a proposed highway tunnel near Stonehenge. They uncovered vast collections of Neolithic and Bronze Age artefacts. Among the finds were graves from the Bronze Age, pottery dating to the late Neolithic period, and a distinctive C-shaped enclosure located directly on the site intended for the tunnel. Within these remains were some fascinating objects: a piece of shale placed in one of the graves, fragments of burnt flint in the C-shaped enclosure, and even the final resting place of a baby. In January of 2022, a new discovery added another layer to the mysteries of Stonehenge. Archaeologists, using an electromagnetic induction field survey around the site, identified thousands of prehistoric pits. By examining the shapes of these pits and the artifacts they contained, the lead researcher, Philippe de Smet, concluded that prehistoric humans had dug 6 of the 9 largest pits. One of the oldest of these pits was estimated to be about 10,000 years old and contained tools used for hunting. In August 2024, the prestigious journal Nature published a study from Curtin University in Australia identifying the origin of the so-called altar stone, a massive stone partially buried under a collapsed sarsen. Researchers traced it back to the Orcadian Basin in northeast Scotland, some 700 kilometres away, highlighting the incredible journeys these stones must have made in prehistory. Among the most famous features of Stonehenge is the heel stone, which stands to the northeast of the main sarsen circle at the end of Stonehenge Avenue. The stone has a rough surface, rises about 16 feet above the ground, and leans slightly toward the circle. Over the centuries, it has been known by various names including Friar's Heel and Sunstone. Its position is significant. At the summer solstice, an observer standing inside the stone circle and looking northeast through the entrance would see the sun rising in line with the heel stone, a spectacle that has been captured in countless photographs. The origins of Stonehenge have long been wrapped in legend. The 12th century work Historia Regum Britannia, written by Geoffrey of Monmouth, tells how the wizard Merlin transported Stonehenge from Ireland. According to the tale, the stones were believed to have healing powers and were brought by giants from Africa to Ireland, where they formed a massive stone circle on Mount Killarus, called the Giant's Ring. In the 5th century, King Aurelius Ambrosius wished to create a memorial for British Celtic nobles slain by the Saxons at Salisbury. Merlin advised him to use the stones from the Giant's Ring. Accompanied by Uther Pendragon, the king sent 15,000 men to Ireland. Though they defeated an Irish army, the stones were too heavy to move without Merlin's magic, who eventually transported them to Britain and re-erected them. Mount Killarus may refer to the Hill of Uisneach in Ireland. While the story is fictional, archaeologist Mike Parker Pearson suggests there may be a grain of truth, as some of Stonehenge's bluestones likely came from the Warnmorn stone circle on the coast of Wales. Another legend tells a darker tale. The Saxon king Hengist invited British Celtic warriors to a feast, only to betray them, massacring 420 guests. He supposedly built Stonehenge on the site as a monument to his guilt. Ownership of Stonehenge changed hands many times. After King Henry VIII acquired Amesbury Abbey and the surrounding lands, he gave the estate to the Earl of Hertford in 1540. Later it passed to Lord Carleton, then the Marquess of Queensberry, and eventually to the Antrobus family from Cheshire, who purchased it in 1824. In 1915, Sir Cosmo Gordon Antrobus put several lots of land, including Stonehenge, up for auction. On the 21st of September, the auction in Salisbury included Stonehenge with about 30 acres of surrounding land. Cecil Chubb bought it for £6,600, roughly £668,000 in 2023, and 3 years later gifted it to the nation. Contrary to popular myth, he did not buy it for his wife. He purchased it on a whim, believing a local man should be the new owner. The plot was only 30 acres in size, and at the time various buildings were visible nearby, most prominently Stonehenge Aerodrome, built for the Royal Flying Corps during the First World War, whose large hangars dominated the skyline. The surrounding land saw further changes. Stonehenge Bottom, a dry valley, became a major road junction with the construction of the A303 and A344 roads, along with cottages and a cafe. In 1927, the land around Stonehenge was auctioned in 3 plots. Plot A, immediately west of the monument, included the now disused aerodrome. Developers were interested, but a subscription fund was launched in August 1927 to save the skyline. King George V was the lead contributor. By October, £8,000 had been raised, enough to purchase Plot A and begin demolishing the aerodrome. Over the next few years, the fund continued acquiring surrounding lands, including Plot C, with work extending through 1929. The National Trust took over management to preserve the site. The last major aerodrome hangar was removed in 1930, and by the mid-1930s the site was fully cleared. In recent years, efforts have been made to return the surrounding fields to native chalk grassland. This process continued in 2022, when the National Heritage Lottery Fund granted funds to the National Trust to acquire another 170 hectares of land around Stonehenge. Stonehenge also experienced a revival as a spiritual site in the 20th century, attracting neo-pagans and adherents of New Age beliefs, particularly neo-Druids. Historian Ronald Hutton remarked on the irony that modern Druids arrived at Stonehenge just as archaeologists were evicting the ancient ones. The Ancient Order of Druids was the first to hold a ceremony in August 1905, admitting 259 new members. The event was widely ridiculed by the press for the participants' white robes and fake beards. Later, Stonehenge became the site of the Stonehenge Free Festival, organised by the Polytantric Circle from 1972 to 1984, drawing around 30,000 visitors at midsummer. However, in 1985 the festival was stopped by a High Court injunction, leading to a violent clash between police and New Age travellers, later known as the Battle of the Beanfield. Following this, the site was closed to religious gatherings for nearly 15 years, until just before the turn of the 21st century. Campaigners, including Arthur Uther Pendragon, obtained a ruling from the European Court of Human Rights, allowing members of genuine religions to worship at Stonehenge. Since then, events have been carefully managed. In 1998, a group of 100 people, including astronomers, archaeologists, druids, locals, pagans and travellers, were permitted access. In 2000, about 7,000 visitors attended the open summer solstice event, and by 2001, the number had risen to around 10,000. When Stonehenge was first opened to the public, visitors could walk freely among the giant stones and even climb on them. This, however, caused serious damage over time, and in 1977, ropes were put in place to protect the monument from further erosion. Today, people can no longer touch the stones, but they can walk around the site at a short distance, taking in the awe-inspiring view. For special occasions such as the summer and winter solstices and the spring and autumn equinoxes, English Heritage allows closer access. Throughout the year, visitors can also make special arrangements to approach the stones directly. In addition, about 30,000 local residents are entitled to free entry under an agreement that was made almost a century ago in 1921. As the number of motor vehicles increased, the landscape around Stonehenge began to change dramatically. 2 roads ran dangerously close to the monument. On the northern side, the A344 road leading to Shrewton and Devizes passed within just 3 metres of the heel stone, and on the southern side, the A303, a major route connecting London with Devon and Cornwall, cut across the historic landscape. In 1979, the Department of the Environment suggested moving visitor facilities into a lower area known as Stonehenge Bottom to lessen the impact. By 1985, a commission set up by English Heritage recommended closing the A344 and building a new visitor centre on Army land to the north of Stonehenge. The existing facilities were described as woefully inadequate for the 1 million visitors expected each year. The issue of access and the closeness of the roads continued to attract criticism. A National Geographic survey in 2006, which looked at conditions at 94 leading World Heritage sites, ranked Stonehenge 75th, declaring it to be in moderate trouble. Plans to reroute the roads were delayed and cancelled multiple times due to controversy. In December of 2007, the government announced that plans to build a tunnel under Stonehenge and create a permanent visitor centre had been abandoned because of high costs. In 2009, however, the government approved a £25 million plan for a smaller visitor centre and the closure of the A344, though this was contingent on funding and local authority planning approval. The following year, Wiltshire Council granted permission for a centre to be built 1.5 miles, or approximately 2.4 kilometres, to the west. English Heritage confirmed that funding would be available, including a £10 million grant from the Heritage Lottery Fund. In June of 2013, the A344 was closed so that the road could be removed and replaced with grass. The new visitor centre, designed by Denton Corker Marshall, opened to the public in December of the same year. In November of 2020, a plan was approved to construct a 4-lane tunnel to carry traffic beneath the site, aiming to remove the section of the A303 that runs close to Stonehenge. National Geographic reported that the plan faced opposition from a group of archaeologists, environmentalists and modern-day druids, while other supporters argued that it would restore the landscape and improve the visitor experience. Opponents feared that underground artifacts might be destroyed, or that excavation could destabilize the stones, causing them to sink, shift, or even fall. Despite legal challenges and the High Court overturning the original planning application in 2021, the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, approved a 2-mile, or about 3.2 kilometre tunnel in July of 2023. Further court challenges in February and July of 2024 were dismissed by the High Court in October of the same year. Meanwhile, the incoming Labour government had already announced in July that the tunnel would not proceed. In March of 2025, English Heritage announced that planning permission had been granted for 2 new buildings near the visitor facilities, a learning centre to the east of the shuttle bus turning circle and a Neolithic classroom near the recreated Neolithic village. These buildings are expected to open in the autumn of 2026. Stonehenge has suffered from vandalism for centuries. Until the 17th century, stones were removed from the site to be used in other building projects. In the 19th century, tourists often chiselled pieces from the stones as souvenirs. The first free festival, held annually from 1975, caused little damage, but by 1978, Stonehenge had to be fenced off to protect it. Repeated acts of vandalism throughout the 1980s and 1990s led authorities to deploy hundreds of police officers, erect barriers around the site and impose exclusion zones of up to 6 kilometres. One act of vandalism in 1984 involved defacing the stones with purple spray paint. At times, the government even closed Stonehenge to the public, only reopening it after public protest. In 2008, 2 men used a hammer and screwdriver to remove a small chip the size of a 10-pence coin from the heel stone, described as the first major vandalism in decades. More recently, in 2020, the British Transport Minister faced criticism from opponents of the road tunnel, who accused the project of being a form of state-sponsored vandalism on the ancient landscape. The project had been delayed for decades due to cost and the risk of damaging archaeological remains. Historian Tom Holland described the tunnel plan as unbelievable in its potential impact on the historic site, even as court challenges against it were ultimately defeated in 2024. Göbekli Tepe is an important archaeological place from the New Stone Age, found in the southeastern part of modern-day Turkey in the Upper Mesopotamia region. People lived there from around 9,500 years before the Common Era to at least 8,000 years before the Common Era, during a time called the Pre-Pottery Neolithic. The site is well known for its round buildings that have huge stone pillars. These pillars are some of the oldest big stones ever found. Many of them have carvings that look like humans, simple clothes, and detailed pictures of wild animals. These carvings help archaeologists understand the early beliefs, symbols and art styles of people who lived a very long time ago. The whole mound of Göbekli Tepe is about 15 meters high and spreads across roughly 8 hectares of land. The top of the mound has the remains of old houses, small buildings, stone water tanks, and quarries used by the people who lived there during the Neolithic time. There are also a few signs of later use, though not very important. The first use of the site goes back to the start of the Southwest Asian Neolithic period. This time is important because it shows the beginning of the world's first permanent human villages. Many experts connect this period, often called the Neolithic Revolution, to the start of farming. But there is still debate about which came first. Did farming make people settle down, or did settled communities lead to farming? Göbekli Tepe is important in this debate because it is a big, carefully built site on a rocky hilltop, yet there is no clear proof that the people there were farming at that time. New discoveries now show that Göbekli Tepe was more than just a religious site. Archaeologists found signs of everyday life, including houses, large-scale grain processing, a water system, and tools used in daily work. These findings go against older ideas that said the site was only a place used by nomads who did not live there permanently. The real purpose of the big stone buildings is still not known. Many popular sources call them the world's first temples, but archaeologists have not decided for sure. The buildings may have had roofs, and evidence shows they collapsed several times because of storms, landslides, or weak structures. After each collapse, people repaired or rebuilt them. The designs and carvings at Göbekli Tepe are similar to other nearby sites of the same age, like Karahan Tepe. The site was first noticed in a survey done in 1963. However, its importance was only understood in 1994 by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt. He started digging in 1995 and worked there until he died in 2014. After that, excavations continued under Turkish prehistory expert Necmi Karel, with help from Istanbul University, the Şanlıurfa Museum, and the German Archaeological Institute. In 2018, Göbekli Tepe was added to the UNESCO World Heritage List because it is an important example of the earliest big buildings made by humans. By 2021, only about 1/10 of the whole site had been dug up. Surveys using special technology have shown that the mound has at least 20 big enclosures that have not been fully explored. Göbekli Tepe is in a place called Taş Tepeler, or Stone Hills, at the foot of the Taurus Mountains. From this high spot, the site looks over the Harran Plain and the upper part of the Balık River, a branch of the Euphrates. It is built on a flat limestone area with steep slopes and cliffs on most sides, except for a narrow ridge that connects it to nearby hills. When people lived there, the weather was warmer and wetter than today. The area was an open steppe with lots of wild grains like incorn, wheat, and barley. Herds of wild animals, like wild goats, wild sheep, gazelles, and ancient horse-like animals, moved across the plains. Large groups of goitered gazelles probably passed near the site during seasonal migrations. There is no clear proof of thick forests in the area at that time. About 90% of the charcoal found at the site comes from pistachio or almond trees, which were likely the main sources of firewood. Like many other pre-pottery Neolithic sites in the Urfa area, Göbekli Tepe was built on a high spot where people could easily see the plains below, and travellers on the plain could see the buildings above. The location also made it easy to get materials like soft limestone for building and flint for making tools. The community collected drinking water using a rain-collecting system with carved channels that directed water into several tanks cut into the rock. These tanks could hold at least 150 cubic meters of water. It is also possible that natural springs were near the site at that time. Excavations have mostly taken place on the southern side of the mound, near a mulberry tree connected to an Islamic pilgrimage story. However, objects have been found across the whole plateau. On the western edge, archaeologists found a small cave that had a single carved picture of a bovid, making it the only artwork in that cave. Göbekli Tepe was built and lived in during one of the first stages of the Southwest Asian New Stone Age, in a period called the Pre-Pottery Neolithic. This long time lasted from about 9,600 years before the start of the Common Era to roughly 7,000 years before the start of the Common Era. It started right after the last ice age ended, when humans slowly began making the first villages on Earth. This time shows some of the world's oldest proof that people stopped wandering and started making permanent homes. One of the earliest known sites linked to this new way of living is Göbekli Tepe. It dates to between 10,700 and 9,250 years before the Common Era, and many researchers believe it helped shape the art style and cultural habits later seen at Göbekli Tepe and the other sites known as Taş Tepeler. For many years, scientists connected these early villages to what is usually called the Neolithic Revolution, the big change when humans moved from hunting and gathering to farming and growing their own food. But researchers still disagree on which happened first. Some think farming made people settle, while others think settling down encouraged farming. What is clear is that this change was slow and uneven. It happened differently across Southwest Asia. In some areas, parts of village life appeared as early as 10,000 years before the Neolithic period even began. The move to farming took thousands of years and happened at different speeds in different regions. Archaeologists divide the pre-pottery Neolithic into two main parts. The first is the pre-pottery Neolithic A, which lasted from about 9,600 to 8,800 years before the Common Era. The second is the pre-pottery Neolithic B, which lasted from about 8,800 to 7,000 years before the Common Era. The earliest activity at Göbekli Tepe belongs to the first part, while later building belongs to the second. Evidence shows that the people of Göbekli Tepe were mostly hunter-gatherers, but they also started adding early farmed grains to their diet. They probably lived in small villages for at least part of each year. Tools found at the site, like grinding stones, mortars and pestles, show that these early people were processing large amounts of grain. Animal bones found there also show that they hunted gazelles on a big scale, especially from midsummer to early autumn. Villages at that time were usually made up of groups of stone or mud brick houses, but sometimes they also had very large and impressive public buildings. Some of these big buildings include the tower and walls of ancient Jericho, along with the large round buildings at Göbekli Tepe, Nevalachori, Chayonu, Wadi Feynan 16, Jef el Ahmar, Tel Abr 3, and Tepe Asyab. Experts believe these community buildings helped people stay connected and work together as their populations grew. The use of T-shaped stone pillars, one of the most famous parts of Göbekli Tepe, comes especially from the Urfa area. Similar pillars have been found in many other pre-pottery Neolithic sites, including Nevalachori, Hamzan Tepe, Karahan Tepe, Harbetsuvan Tepesi, Sefer Tepe, and Tasla Tepe. Other sites farther away also have stone pillars, though not always in the T-shape. Radiocarbon testing shows that the oldest buildings at Göbekli Tepe were built between 9,500 and 9,000 years before the Common Era, near the end of the pre-pottery Neolithic period. The site grew quickly during the early 9th millennium before the Common Era and continued to be used until around 8,000 years before the Common Era, or maybe a little later. After the main buildings were abandoned, smaller groups of people seem to have returned and lived among the ruins. When digging started, Klaus Schmidt, the lead archaeologist, believed Göbekli Tepe belonged to the pre-pottery Neolithic based on the stone tools found there. He thought the earlier period, the pre-pottery Neolithic A, was the most likely time. However, proving the exact age of the site was hard. The first radiocarbon dates were published in 1998, but they seemed too young, between 500 and 1,000 years later than expected. Schmidt thought these samples came from material that had washed into the area after the site was abandoned, so his team used a new dating method using organic material preserved in plaster on the walls. These tests gave dates that fit much better with the early 10th millennium before the Common Era. Over time, new research corrected earlier mistakes, including the idea that the fill inside buildings came from far away. Scientists also found that plaster dating can be affected by the old wood effect, which makes samples look older than they really are. With new and more accurate radiocarbon results, the age of Göbekli Tepe is now firmly placed between 9,500 and 8,000 years before the Common Era, covering the late pre-pottery Neolithic A and the early pre-pottery Neolithic B. Earlier, Schmidt believed the site had 3 layers from different periods, but this idea was later replaced. Today, researchers identify 8 stages that together cover at least 1,500 years. These stages show the building, rebuilding, and eventual abandonment of the large circular enclosures, along with the changes in nearby houses. The earliest stage, in the second half of the 10th millennium before the Common Era, includes the first versions of enclosures A to D and round or oval homes that show people were starting to settle down. In the next stage, during the early 9th millennium before the Common Era, major changes were made to these enclosures, including new walls and the first large T-shaped pillars. More homes were built during this time, slowly changing from round to rectangular shapes. During the following stages in the early pre-pottery Neolithic B, The northern and western slopes were filled with rectangular buildings that went through many building stages. Builders added benches, placed pillars, and created more complex rooms. The large enclosures were also repaired and changed. At the end of the early pre-pottery Neolithic B, a huge slope collapse buried many buildings with soil and rubble, badly damaging enclosure D. This led to major repair work. Building C was rebuilt for the last time, and a terrace wall was added to try to stop future slope slides. However, another big slide eventually hit the site, likely causing the final abandonment of enclosure D in the late 9th millennium before the Common Era. In the later stages, building activity slowly decreased. After losing some major structures, new buildings like Building G and the so-called Lion Pillar Building were built. Another terrace wall was added as one last effort to strengthen the slope. Finally, in the last stage, small houses were built inside what was left of the abandoned Neolithic village, showing that even after centuries, people still return to this mysterious and powerful place. The earliest round buildings at this ancient site began to appear during the second half of the 10th millennium before the Common Era. These impressive circular compounds were very big. They stretched from 10 meters to 30 meters across, roughly the length of a large modern building. Their most striking feature is the group of tall T-shaped limestone pillars placed evenly inside thick walls built from rough, unshaped stones. So far, archaeologists have uncovered 4 of these circular buildings, but ground scans show 16 more remain buried. Each of those hidden circles once held up to 8 pillars, meaning nearly 200 pillars were originally standing here. The stone slabs used to build these ancient monuments were carried from rock pits about 100 meters away from the top of the hill. Workers back then used simple flint tools to cut through the hard limestone, a great achievement for people living thousands of years before metal tools were invented. These pillars are now known to be the oldest megaliths ever found in the world. At the center of every circular building stand 2 taller pillars facing each other, almost as if they were part of a ritual or symbolic conversation. Experts still do not know whether these circles were ever covered with roofs. Inside the buildings, stone benches built directly into the walls suggest that people gathered here, maybe sitting or taking part in ceremonies. Many pillars are covered with mysterious carved symbols and detailed images of animals. These carvings include lions, bulls, wild boars, foxes, gazelle, donkeys and snakes, as well as spiders, insects, and various birds, especially vultures, which also appear in sacred art at places like Çatalhöyük and ancient Jericho. These images might have represented spiritual beliefs, shared cultural symbols, or stories known to the people of that time. Interestingly, very few human-like figures appear in the artwork. However, some of the T-shaped pillars have arms carved into their sides, leading Klaus Schmidt to suggest that the pillars might represent stylized human bodies or even ancient gods. A few pillars also show what look like simple loincloths. Schmidt thought that the horizontal top stones symbolized shoulders, meaning that the carved figures were intentionally left without heads. Whether these carvings were meant to represent ancestors, symbolic worshippers, or supernatural beings remains a mystery. Some floors in the oldest layer of the site were made from burnt lime plaster, also called terrazzo, while others were carved directly out of the bedrock. The 2 central pillars in each circle were carved in high relief, giving them a more 3-dimensional look. Radiocarbon testing shows that these earliest round buildings were built around 9,000 years before the Common Era. Later on, new buildings were made in rectangular shapes, maybe to use space better. Even though the shapes changed, the T-shaped pillars continued to appear, showing that the cultural or ceremonial purpose of the place stayed the same during the pre-pottery Neolithic B period. These rectangular buildings had smooth lime plaster floors like those used later in Roman architecture. Tests show they date to between 8,800 and 8,000 years before the Common Era. Several smaller T-pillars stood in the centers of these rooms. One pair of pillars decorated with fierce lions gave their building the nickname the Lion Pillar Building. During the earliest period of life at the site, people built round or oval houses near the main enclosures. This shows that they lived at least partly settled lives, not just as wandering hunter-gatherers. Over time, their homes changed from rounded shapes to rectangular plans, and by the last phase of settlement, only small buildings were put up. For many years before human remains were found, Schmidt predicted that burials might be hidden behind the walls of the circular buildings. Then, in 2017, fragments of human skulls with deliberate cuts were found. These marks suggest that the people here practiced the Neolithic skull cult, a tradition also known from places like ancient Jericho, Tel Aswad, Yiftahel, and later Tzatal Hoyuk, where human skulls were carefully prepared, plastered, and displayed. On the western side of the hill, archaeologists found a sculpture shaped like a lion. This area also has many flint and limestone chips, leading researchers to think that it may once have been a workshop where stone carvings were made. Nearby, on the southern plateau, 3 carved phallic shapes were found on the surface. However, because they lie close to quarries from classical times, their age is hard to tell. Beyond the main mound is a carved stone platform with 2 deep sockets that may once have held large pillars. A flat bench surrounds this platform, which belongs to the site's oldest stage. Following the naming pattern of the excavation teams, it is called Complex E, or sometimes the Temple of the Rock, because it looks like a religious building from another Neolithic site called Nevelachori. The floor of this building was cut directly out of the bedrock and polished smooth, like the terrazzo floors of the younger buildings. Just northwest of the platform are 2 deep pits thought to be part of the same complex. One pit even has a tall table-height pin carved from the rock, along with a short stairway of 5 steps. The wide rocky plateau where Gobleki Tepe stands today has been shaped and reshaped for thousands of years, ever since the New Stone Age. Wind, rain, and early human activity slowly carved the land. On the southern side of the plateau, there are 4 long and narrow channels cut straight into the rock. Each channel is about 10 meters long and about 20 centimeters wide, and experts believe these grooves were once part of an old stone quarry. From this quarry, people long ago cut out large rectangular blocks of stone. These old channels may even be connected to the remains of a square-shaped building nearby. Only the foundation of this building still exists, and some researchers think it might have once been a Roman watchtower that stood along the border system called the Limes Arabicus. Most of the carved shapes and cut surfaces across the plateau seem to come from New Stone Age quarrying. This was where ancient builders cut out the huge single-piece stone pillars that would later stand inside the circular buildings of Gobleki Tepe. Workers first outlined the pillar shapes by pecking their profiles into the bedrock. After that, they put tools and levers under the blocks and carefully lifted them away from the rock. Archaeologists still disagree on how much human work was needed to create this amazing site. Klaus Schmidt, the archaeologist who led the modern digs, argued strongly that the task of cutting, shaping, moving and setting up such huge limestone pillars must have needed far more than a small group of people. He compared it to Thor Heyerdahl's experiments on Easter Island, which tested how the islanders might have moved their giant Moai statues. Based on these tests, Schmidt estimated that just moving pillars of similar size would have needed hundreds of people. One experiment showed that carving a Moai statue the size of a Gobleki Tepe pillar might take 20 people a whole year, while moving it over 15 kilometers might need between 50 and 75 people working for 1 week. Schmidt's team also mentioned a 1917 report from the Indonesian island of Nias. In that case, more than 500 people needed 3 full days to move a single huge stone. Because of examples like this, Schmidt and others thought Göbekli Tepe could only have been built by a very large group of workers, possibly people who did not live there, but were brought or persuaded to come by a small religious or political group. Other researchers disagree. They think far fewer people might have been needed. Some experiments show that between 7 and 14 people, using only ropes and water or other slippery materials, could have moved the pillars using the same simple methods used for other ancient monuments like Stonehenge. Tests done directly at Göbekli Tepe suggest that all the known structures from the later New Stone Age could have been built by between 12 and 24 people in less than 4 months. This includes the time spent getting stone and preparing food. These smaller numbers fit well with what a single large family or a small community could do. They also match the amount of space inside the buildings, which seems made for gatherings of this size. Some experts, like Avi Gopher and Roy Hackley, think the main enclosures called B, C and D were originally planned as one connected complex shaped like a perfect triangle. These enclosures were built more than 10 meters lower than the highest point of the settlement. Over time, the area had several landslides. One especially damaging landslide happened near the end of the early pre-pottery Neolithic B period. It filled enclosure D with fallen dirt and rocks, damaged household remains, soil, and even human burials. This disaster badly damaged the structure, forcing the builders to repair and strengthen it. Later, in what archaeologists call Building Phase 5, they built terrace walls to try to protect the site from future collapses. But these defences failed. Another major landslide during Building Phase 6, most likely in the late 9th millennium BCE, caused so much damage that the enclosure was abandoned. Other enclosures had similar damage, which may explain why new ones were built over time. For many years, archaeologists thought these large enclosures had been deliberately filled in by the builders. However, after Klaus Schmidt died, this idea became less popular among researchers. Göbekli Tepe is full of stone tools made from flint. These tools appear everywhere, from the top of the ridge down to the slopes. The stone tools found here are similar to those from other early farming communities in the northern Levant. In 1963, more than 3,000 tools were uncovered. Almost all of them were finely made flint objects, with only a few made from obsidian. Among the tools were cores, blades, flakes, scrapers, burins, and projectile points, common tools of the time. Inside a small building called Space 16, next to Enclosure D, archaeologists found almost 700 tools. Most of these were sharpened blades, along with many scrapers, perforators, shiny-edged tools, burins, and tiny microliths. Across the whole site, more than 7,000 grinding stones have been found. These were used throughout the site's long history, and plant remains stuck in the soil suggest they were used to process cereal grains, though no one knows if the grains were wild or grown. The pillars inside the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe are all T-shaped, a style shared with other early New Stone Age sites in the area. But at Göbekli Tepe, many pillars are decorated, usually with low, shallow carvings and sometimes with deeper, more dramatic designs. Most carvings show animals, especially snakes, foxes, and wild boars. Other animals include gazelles, wild sheep, wild donkeys, ducks, and vultures. Almost all the animals shown are male and are often carved in tense or aggressive poses. There are also abstract symbols carved into the stone, upright or sideways, H-shaped signs, crescents, and round discs. Human figures are much less common. One famous carving found on Pillar 43 in Enclosure D shows a headless man with an erect phallus. Other phallic figures have been found here and at nearby sites. Many archaeologists think the pillars themselves are meant to represent people. The vertical part looks like a body, and the flat top looks like a head. Some pillars even show carved arms, hands, and clothing, supporting this idea. The two central pillars in each large enclosure seem to have held special symbolic meaning. The pair in Enclosure D clearly represent humans, with carved belts and cloth covering their genitals. No one knows their sex for sure, though Schmidt thought they might be male because belts were considered a male accessory at the time. Only one clear carving of a woman has been found, a small image showing a naked female figure. Schmidt and animal expert Joris Peters suggested that the many animal carvings do not follow one single style or belief system. Since many of the animals shown are dangerous predators, they proposed that the pillars might have been meant to protect the community from harm, or could have served as sacred symbols or totems. Archaeologists have also found many smaller carved stones at the site. These are harder to date, but their images match those on the larger pillars, mostly animals, some humans, usually male figures. One special structure contained what researchers call a totem pole, carved during the early pre-pottery Neolithic B period. When the broken pieces were put back together, the pole stood about 192 centimeters tall and about 30 centimeters wide. It showed three stacked figures. At the top was a large predator, possibly a bear or a big cat with its head missing. Below it was a human torso with arms but no head. At the bottom was another human figure whose head survived. Small snake carvings ran down both sides. Klaus Schmidt thought Göbekli Tepe was not a village or a place where people lived every day, but a special gathering spot mainly used for rituals. In his view, small groups of nomadic people from different parts of the region would travel to this high hill from time to time. They would meet there, work together on big building projects, share huge feasts, take part in important ceremonies, and then return to their separate roaming lives. Many butchered animal bones, including deer, gazelle, pigs, and geese, were found in large amounts across the site. These bones were leftovers from animals that had been hunted, cooked, and served to the people who gathered there. Studies of these bones showed something interesting. Gazelles only stayed in that region during certain seasons. This means the big gatherings, rituals, and feasts at Göbekli Tepe were most likely planned to match the times of year when wild animals were most plentiful. To Schmidt, the impressive building projects happening here helped lead to the later development of cities and complex civilizations. Schmidt also tried to understand the belief systems of the people who built Göbekli Tepe by comparing it to other ancient shrines and early settlements. He thought the builders followed shamanic traditions, where certain people communicated with the spirit world. He suggested that the tall T-shaped pillars represented humans, possibly ancestors or respected spirits. Yet he thought that real gods and goddesses, like those later seen in Mesopotamia, only appeared centuries later with large temples and royal palaces. This fits with an ancient Sumerian story that says farming, raising animals and weaving were gifts given to humans from a sacred mountain called Ikur. On this mountain lived the Anuna deities, very old gods without personal names. Schmidt believed this story preserved memories from the early Neolithic world. The carvings on the pillars at Göbekli Tepe are also unusual. They do not show scenes of organised violence, no hunting raids, no injured animals, none of the everyday game like deer that the people depended on. Instead, the carvings show powerful, dangerous creatures such as lions, snakes, spiders, and scorpions. Building on Schmidt's idea that the circular structures may have been sanctuaries, one scholar, Georgiou, suggested that the symbols and animal designs might form a kind of map of the universe, connecting the people who gathered there with the land around them, and even with the sky. However, not everyone agrees that Göbekli Tepe was only a ritual site. Some researchers have suggested that the structures may also have served as large communal houses, similar in some ways to the great wooden plank houses of the northwest coast of North America, which had carved posts and totem-like designs. One mystery remains. Every few decades, the builders buried the standing pillars and built new ones inside smaller, tighter circles. No one yet knows why they did this. Over the years, some archaeologists, including Remy Haddad, have started to question the idea that Göbekli Tepe was only a ceremonial centre for nomads. Instead, they suggest it may have been more like other large pre-pottery Neolithic sites, where everyday life and ritual life happened side by side. The discovery of house-like buildings and systems made to collect rainwater supports this newer idea and makes people rethink the old temple-only view. Although some people have said that Göbekli Tepe was an ancient observatory used to watch the stars, the team working at the site has mostly rejected these ideas. Long before archaeologists studied it, the hill known today as Göbekli Tepe was already considered sacred by local Kurdish communities, who called it Gire Mirazan, meaning Wish Hill, or sometimes Zerebreshke. The site first got the attention of researchers in the year 1963 during an archaeological survey led by Halit Chambal from Istanbul University and Robert John Braidwood from the University of Chicago. An American archaeologist named Peter Benedict noticed that the stone tools found on the surface belonged to the early Aceramic Neolithic period, but he mistakenly thought the tops of the T-shaped pillars were simple grave markers. For many years the hill had been farmed, and local villagers had moved stones into piles while clearing the land. At some point, some of the pillars were even broken by farmers who thought they were just large rocks in the way. In the month of October, in the year 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who had earlier worked at another Neolithic site called Nevelachori, returned to the place described by the Chicago team decades earlier. He asked villagers about hills with flint, and a man named Mahmut Yildiz, whose family owned the land, guided him to the spot. The Yildiz family had already found ancient objects while ploughing and had reported them to the local museum. Because Schmidt had seen similar stone structures at Nevelachori, he quickly realized that these were not grave markers, but the tops of huge prehistoric pillars. He began digging the following year and soon uncovered the first of the enormous T-shaped megaliths. In the end, he found only 3 real tombs on the Eastern Hill Group, a place used for pilgrimage. Mahmut Yildiz later joined the excavation team and became the site's guard. Schmidt continued to lead the digs for the Schönlöfer Museum and the German Archaeological Institute until he died in the year 2014. After his death, the institute's research was managed by Lee Clare. By the year 2021, investigations were being done together by Istanbul University, the Schönlöfer Museum, and the German Archaeological Institute, under the main direction of Nesmi Karul. More recent work has focused not on finding new areas, but on carefully recording and protecting the parts already uncovered. In the year 2018, Göbekli Tepe was officially recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site because it is one of the earliest known examples of large, human-made monumental buildings. By the year 2021, only about 1/10 of the entire site had been dug up, meaning most of it is still buried underground. In that same year, 2018, A controversy started when Chidem Kuxel Schmidt, the archaeologist and widow of Klaus Schmidt, said that conservation work had damaged the site through the use of concrete and heavy machines, while workers installed a new walkway. The Ministry of Culture and Tourism responded by saying that no concrete was used and that no harm had been done. The Plain of Jars, known in Lao as Donghai Hin, is an extraordinary ancient site in Laos, filled with thousands of massive stone jars spread across the high valleys and lower hills of the central Xiangquang Plateau. These jars are not scattered randomly. They are arranged in clusters that can range from just one jar to several hundred. This plateau lies at the northern end of the Annamese Cordillera, the main mountain range of Indochina, giving the area a dramatic and rugged backdrop. The French researcher Madeleine Kalani, in the year 1930, suggested that these jars were linked to burial practices, an idea later supported by excavations carried out by Lao and Japanese archaeologists over the decades. Around the jars they found human remains, burial items and pottery, confirming that the jars played a role in ancient funerary rituals. Using modern scientific techniques, such as optically stimulated luminescence, researchers discovered that some jars were placed as early as 1240 to 660 years before the Common Era. Studies of the stones themselves, specifically at what is called Site 1, showed that the jars had been moved from a quarry located about 8 kilometers away, proving the immense effort required to position them. Today, the Plain of Jars is recognized as one of the most significant prehistoric sites in all of Southeast Asia. In Jianghuang province alone, more than 90 jar sites have been identified. UNESCO officially recognizes over 50 of these sites, though there are many more that have been documented but not yet officially listed. Each site contains anywhere from 1 jar to 400 jars, and altogether, more than 2,100 jars have now been documented. These jars vary in size, standing between 1 and 3 meters tall and carved entirely from solid rock. They are usually cylindrical, with the bottom wider than the top, giving them a stable, grounded appearance. Alongside the jars, archaeologists have found stone discs. Unlike the jar lids, these discs have at least one flat side and none were ever found resting on a jar, nor would they fit on top. There are far fewer discs than jars, totaling around 200. Scholars believe that these discs may have served as markers for graves, either placed near jars or laid on the ground to indicate burial pits. Some jars also contained human remains, further supporting the idea that the discs marked burial sites. In the northern part of Xianghuang, there exists a complex network of deliberately arranged standing stones, known as the Standing Stones of Huafan, which date back to the Bronze Age and appear to be part of the same burial tradition. Many of the discs are decorated with images, showing both human and animal figures. The human-like figures, or anthropomorphic representations, are almost always in a spread eagle pose, with straight or bent legs, and appear very similar to each other. The animal-like or zoomorphic images include tigers, monkeys, and other creatures. Only one jar has ever been found with carvings, a remarkable frogman figure in bas-relief at Site 1. Interestingly, this carving has similarities with rock paintings found at Huashan in Guangxi, China, which show humans in full frontal poses with arms raised and knees bent, dating from 500 years before the Common Era to 200 years in the Common Era. The most famous and most visited jar site is near the town of Fontseven and is called Site 1. 7 sites have been cleared of unexploded bombs and are now open to visitors. These include Sites 1, 2 and 3, as well as Site 16 near the old capital Xianghuang, Site 23 near the large hot spring in Muangkam, Site 25 in the mostly untouched Fokut district, and Site 52, which is the largest known jar site containing 392 jars near a traditional Hmong village, accessible only on foot. The first detailed archaeological work at the Plain of Jars was done by Madeleine Kalani in 1935. She documented 21 sites, giving each one a name, and noted additional potential sites that later researchers sometimes had difficulty locating due to differences in measurement systems. The most well-known site she recorded is Site 1, also called Banang. In her early excavations, Kalani uncovered around 20 jars along with spindle whorls, ear discs, glass beads, and bronze and iron tools, knives and jewellery. Some jars even contained human remains and glass beads. Kalani published her findings in 2 volumes in 1935, concluding that the Plain of Jars was an Iron Age burial site. Inside the jars, she found black soil mixed with coloured glass beads and fragments of burnt bones and teeth, sometimes from more than one person. Around the jars, she discovered human bones, pottery shards, iron and bronze items, glass and stone beads, ceramic weights, and charcoal. Evidence indicated that bones and teeth inside the jars had been cremated, while burials surrounding the jars contained unburned remains, suggesting a mix of cremation and secondary burials. After Kalani, no major archaeological research took place until November 1994, when Professor Eiji Nitta from Kagoshima University, along with Lao archaeologist Thongsa Sayavongkamdi, surveyed and mapped Site 1. Nitta suggested that the burial pits around the jars were created at the same time as the jars themselves, and that the jars served as symbolic monuments marking these burials. He dated the Plain of Jars to the late 2nd millennium or early 1st millennium before the Common Era, based on burial urns and associated grave goods. Sayavongkamdi conducted further surveys and excavations between 1994 and 1996 with support from the Australian National University. Together with Peter Bellwood, they interpreted the jars as monuments for a central person's burial, surrounded by secondary burials of family members. Later, archaeological work conducted during bomb clearance operations, supervised by UNESCO archaeologist Julie van den Berg in 2004 to 2005 and again in 2007, produced similar findings. Like Nitta, van den Berg concluded that the jars and the surrounding burials were created at the same time, confirming their role as ancient monuments marking the dead. In 2018, a team of archaeologists led by Dugald O'Reilly carried out an extensive study under the Safeguarding the Plain of Jars project, often called the SPJP. Their research covered 59 confirmed jar sites, along with dozens of undocumented and potential sites, uncovering fascinating details about these mysterious stone jars. They found that most of the jar sites were located in hilly or mountainous areas rather than flat plains, and that most sites had only a small number of jars. Only 16 sites had between 20 and 60 jars, and just 3 sites boasted more than 200 jars. The team also identified 6 different styles of jar rims: flat rims, recessed inner rims, outer rims, recessed inner rims combined with outer rims, prominent rims, and collar rims. The jars are usually found in small clusters on the lower slopes and ridges of hills that rise around the central plateau and the surrounding upland valleys. Several quarries, often located close to the jar sites, were also discovered, indicating that the stones were likely sourced nearby. The jars were made from 5 types of rock: sandstone, granite, conglomerate, limestone, and breccia. While it is generally thought that the people of the Plain of Jars used iron chisels to carve these enormous stones, no direct evidence of this has been found. There are also regional differences in the shapes of jars. In most cases, these differences seem to come from the way the rock was shaped or chosen, but in some cases unique features, like the placement of the openings of the jars, appear to be specific to certain sites. Most of the jars are made from sandstone. The largest sandstone jars are found only in the mountains, never in the plains or lowlands. The reasoning's practical. Moving and shaping such massive stones would have required advanced quarrying and transportation techniques, which were more feasible in hilly regions near the quarries. Granite jars, on the other hand, are rare and have been discovered only in the Kun district. Many of these granite jars are small and heavily weathered, likely because carving granite is much more difficult and time-consuming. Conglomerate jars, made from a mixture of medium-sized gravel and cobbles set in a fine matrix, are often found in poor condition, broken into fragments over time. Limestone jars are less common and come in 2 varieties: a weaker, honeycombed and brittle type that weathers easily, and a stronger mid-grey reef limestone with fine layers that resist weathering somewhat better. Only a few sites, including Site 39 at Banfunkum, Bantha, Site 41 at Pho Enkar, and Site 43 at Puhai Hin, contain limestone jars. Breccia jars are even rarer, found at only one location, Ban Nom Hom, where the jars sit on a fault line in a steep valley with local hot springs, which influence both the composition and placement of the jars. Laos has 2 major iron ore deposits, both located in Jianghuang province. It is possible that the locations of many jar sites in this area relate to ancient mining and trading activities. Historically, Jianghuang, at the northern edge of the Annamite Range, has served as a natural corridor, allowing movement from the north and east toward the south and west. Within this setting, the jar sites may represent a network of interconnected villages, with the jars strategically placed along long overland routes linking the Mekong River basin and the Gulf of Tonkin. Despite differences in jar material, shape and numbers, all sites share common characteristics. They are elevated, offer commanding views of the surrounding land, and were associated with burial practices. Human remains have been discovered at many of the jar sites, both inside the jars and in secondary burials nearby. At Site 1, several stone jars and burial pits contained human remains, sometimes covered by stone slabs. In 2004, Vandenberg's team also found human remains in 2 ceramic vessels. Excavations in 2016 attempted to recover DNA from the remains at Site 1 to determine the ethnicity of the people buried there, as well as to establish precise dates. However, dating human remains has been difficult because many previous estimates were based on the jars themselves, not the bodies inside, and the findings from these DNA studies were not documented. Later bomb clearance operations in the area did not involve emptying the jars, so no additional evidence was obtained. Vandenberg suggested that the jars may originally have been used to distill the bodies, with cremated remains representing the final phase of burial. Jars with smaller openings may reflect a reduced need to place whole bodies inside. In 2001, researchers R. Engelhardt and P. Rogers proposed that the jars could have served as distilling vessels, similar to traditional Southeast Asian royal funerary practices. In these traditions, the deceased is placed in a container during the early stages of the funeral. This process is believed to help the soul gradually transition from the earthly world to the spiritual realm. After this initial stage, the body is cremated and the ashes are buried elsewhere. Royal burials were typically located across watercourses from living areas, in prominent high places. Among the black tie people, who have lived in the region since at least the 11th century, nobles were cremated to release their spirits to heaven, while commoners were buried, leaving their spirits on earth. Many of the human remains found at the Plain of Jars were cremated. Differences in how bodies were cremated inside the jars and buried nearby, as noted by the early researcher Kalani, remain difficult to fully explain. Most of the cremated remains appear to belong to adolescents. At Site 1, there is also a natural limestone cave with a northwest-facing opening and 2 man-made holes at the top, thought to have served as chimneys for a crematorium. In the early 1930s, Kalani excavated this cave and uncovered evidence supporting the idea that it was used as a cremation site. Local legends from Laos tell of a time long ago when giants roamed the land. These giants were said to be ruled by a powerful king named Kun Chung, who fought a long and difficult battle against his enemies and eventually emerged victorious. According to the stories, to celebrate this great triumph, he had enormous jars made to brew and store vast amounts of lao hai, a type of rice beer or rice wine, as lao means alcohol and hai means jar. Another local tale adds a curious twist. It suggests that the jars were not carved from stone at all, but instead were moulded from a mixture of natural ingredients like clay, sand, sugar and products from animals, forming a kind of primitive stone-like material. This led many people in the region to believe that the cave at what is now called Site 1 was actually a giant kiln, where the jars were baked rather than chiselled from rock. The Plain of Jars, however, is not only famous for these mysterious giant containers, but also for the scars of modern history. From May of 1964 to the summer of 1969, this area became a battleground in what is now remembered as the Secret War. The United States Air Force carried out heavy bombing campaigns here against North Vietnamese and Pathet Lao communist forces. During this period, about 1/3 of the anti-personnel cluster bombs dropped failed to explode, leaving a deadly legacy that still threatens local communities today. The presence of such a large number of unexploded bombs, particularly cluster munitions, makes free movement across the plain extremely dangerous. Visitors can see the evidence of these raids everywhere. Broken or shifted jars and deep craters in the earth serve as haunting reminders of the violence that once swept the region. Today, tourists can only explore the plain safely along pathways that have been cleared of bombs and carefully marked for guidance. Efforts to make the area safer have been ongoing. From July of 2004 to July of 2005, the Mines Advisory Group, a non-governmental organisation working in partnership with UNESCO and supported by the New Zealand government through NZ, successfully cleared unexploded bombs from the 3 most frequently visited jar sites. A second round of bomb clearance was carried out in 2007, again funded by NZ, which allowed 4 additional jar sites to be safely opened to visitors. On the 6th of July 2019, the Plain of Jars received global recognition for its cultural and historical importance when it was officially inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Today, the jars stand as silent witnesses to both the myths of ancient giants and the very real human conflicts that shaped the region, making the Plain of Jars a place where legend and history collide in the most extraordinary way. The Moai are enormous stone statues of human figures created by the Rapa Nui people on Rapa Nui, better known as Easter Island, which is located in the eastern part of Polynesia. These statues were carved between the years 1250 and 1500. Almost half of all Moai remain at Rano Raraku, the main quarry where they were carved, while hundreds more were moved from there and set upon stone platforms called ahu, which circle the island. Nearly all Moai have unusually large heads, which make up about 3/8 of the total height of the statue, and they have no legs. The statues are believed to represent the living faces of deified ancestors, watching over the clans that created them. When European explorers first arrived in the year 1722, the Moai were still standing, looking inward over their communities. However, by the latter part of the 19th century, all of them had been toppled. The statues were likely knocked over during the late 18th and early 19th centuries, possibly due to European contact or conflicts between local tribes. Creating and transporting more than 900 statues was an extraordinary achievement, both in skill and sheer physical effort. The tallest Moai ever erected, known as Paro, was nearly 10 meters high and weighed about 82 tons. The heaviest Moai to be set up stood at Ahu Tongariki and weighed 86 tons, although it was shorter and broader than Paro. There is even one unfinished statue that, if completed, would have reached roughly 21 meters in height and weighed between 145 and 165 tons. New Moai continue to be discovered even today. These statues were carved from volcanic tuff, a type of solidified ash, and their simple but powerful forms reflect styles seen throughout Polynesia. The Rapa Nui sculptors first outlined the human figures in the rock, then carefully chipped away the stone until the figures emerged. The large heads, often 3 to 5 times the size of the body, were significant because Polynesian belief held the head to be sacred. The faces feature heavy brows, long noses with a distinctive fishhook-shaped curve at the nostrils, thin lips that slightly pout, and long rectangular ears. The jawlines are strong, standing out against the short necks. The torsos are broad, sometimes with subtle carvings to show the collarbones. The arms are carved in low relief and rest along the body in various positions, with hands and long fingers often meeting at the loincloth. Most statues have no visible legs, except for one kneeling figure. Despite being full-body statues, Moai are often called Easter Island heads in popular books and media. This is partly because of the large heads, and partly because many images show the Moai on the slopes of Rano Raraku, where they are buried up to their shoulders, giving the impression that they have no bodies. Excavations have revealed the buried portions of these statues, showing bodies that are decorated with markings that were protected from erosion. On average, the Moai are about 4 meters tall, with bases roughly 1.6 meters wide. Each statue weighs around 12.5 tons. Most of the more than 900 Moai were carved from tuff from Rano Raraku, where 394 statues in various stages of completion can still be seen today. Some were made from other rocks, including 13 from basalt, 22 from trachyte, and 17 from fragile red scoria. After carving, the statues were polished with pumice to make them smooth. Moai are recognizable for their broad noses, prominent chins, rectangular ears, and deep eye sockets. Their arms rest along the body in different positions, and they face inland, watching over the communities. A few, like the 7 at Ahua Kiwi, face the sea to guide travellers to the island. The eye sockets, which are deep and rounded, were designed to hold eyes made from white coral with pupils of black obsidian or red scoria. Archaeologists discovered this in 1979 when Sergio Rapuhawa and his team collected and pieced together fragments of coral from different sites. These statues with eyes were likely placed on important platforms for ceremonies, reflecting a hierarchy in Rapa Nui society. The Moai were not only symbolic, but also believed to hold spiritual power called mana. They represented ancestors and were considered to protect the people. The addition of pukao, red stone top knots placed on the heads of later statues further emphasized the status of certain Moai. The pukao were carved from a lightweight red rock from Punapau, and red was considered a sacred color in Polynesia. When first carved, the statues were polished smooth, although the soft tuff is easily eroded over time. Some statues have carvings on their backs and buttocks, linking them to traditional Rapa Nui tattoo designs, which had been suppressed by missionaries about 50 years earlier. DNA studies have confirmed that the Rapa Nui were the creators of the Moai, not outsiders. Some Moai were painted, with red or maroon pigments used on certain statues. For example, Huahakananaya was painted in maroon and white, before being taken from the island in 1868 and is now in the British Museum, though there have been requests for its return to Rapa Nui. The Moai statues were carved by the native Polynesian people of Easter Island, mostly during the period from around 1250 to 1500. These towering stone figures were not only meant to represent ancestors who had passed away, but were also thought to embody the spirit and authority of important chiefs, both living and long gone. Placed upon stone platforms known as ahu, each statue acted as a powerful symbol of status. The bigger the Moai, the greater the mana, or spiritual power, of the chief who commissioned it. Among the Easter Islanders, there was a constant drive to create the largest and most impressive statues, and this competitive spirit can still be seen in the wide variety of sizes the Moai took. Once a statue was completed, it was transported from the quarry to an ahu, often along the coast. Some were topped with pukao, red stone cylinders that served as elaborate hats. The process of carving and moving the Moai was extremely time-consuming and labour-intensive. Creating a single statue required tremendous skill, resources, and effort, and once finished, it still had to be hauled across the island and carefully erected. The quarries, particularly at Rano Raraku, appear to have been abandoned suddenly. Today, archaeologists find piles of stone tools, dozens of finished Moai waiting to be moved, and nearly as many incomplete statues still stuck in the rock. In the 19th century, this strange scene led some people to imagine that Easter Island might have been part of a sunken continent, with most of the statues lying beneath the sea. That idea has long been disproven. Modern research suggests several explanations for the unfinished or abandoned statues. Some were never meant to be completed. Some were left incomplete when carvers hit hard inclusions in the rock. Some were permanently left at Rano Raraku, and others were simply unfinished when the statue building era ended. Tuff, the soft volcanic rock used for carving, often contains hard lumps, which could stop work on a statue. It remains unclear which members of the island society were responsible for carving the Moai. Oral traditions suggest either a specialized class of skilled carvers, respected like other high-ranking craftsmen across Polynesia, or members of each individual clan. Evidence indicates that the quarry itself was divided into sections, each belonging to a different clan. When Europeans first arrived on the island, it was largely treeless, which made the transportation of these enormous statues a mystery. However, analysis of fossil pollen and charcoal in sediment cores from the island's three main crater lakes shows that forests once covered Easter Island. These forests were gradually cut down between 800 and 1200 in the Common Era, during the initial settlement by migrants from eastern Polynesia, and again in the decades or centuries before the year 1700. How exactly the Moai were moved across the island is still debated, but many theories exist. Early researchers believed the statues were hauled using human strength, ropes, wooden sleds, rollers, and levelled tracks, sometimes called the Easter Island roads. Another idea proposed that the Moai were rolled on logs, requiring between 50 and 150 people. The most recent evidence suggests a fascinating method. The statues were moved upright by a rocking motion, tilting them gently from side to side while pulling forward with ropes from two sides. Oral stories tell of divine assistance in moving the Moai. The earliest accounts speak of a king named Tukuihu who, with help from the god Make, moved the statues. Later tales describe a solitary woman on a mountain commanding them at will. Modern scholars generally support the idea that the Moai walked upright, likely using a controlled rocking motion. Laying them flat on sleds, as the islanders did in the 1860s, would have required an enormous workforce, around 1,500 people for the largest statues. In 1998, researcher Joanne van Tilburg proposed that fewer than half that number could move a statue using sleds on lubricated rollers. She even supervised an experiment that year moving a 9-ton replica Moai with 60 people on an A-frame sledge. The first attempt failed when the rollers jammed, but the second succeeded on prepared tracks. Earlier experiments, such as those in 1986 by Pavel Pavel, Thor Heyerdahl, and the Kon-Tiki Museum, tried moving 5-ton and 9-ton replicas using ropes around the head and base, with 8 and 16 workers respectively. They rocked the statues forward, but the experiments ended early due to damage to the statue bases. Heyerdahl estimated that a 20-ton statue could be moved about 320 feet per day with this method, but many scholars doubted it was practical due to potential base damage. Around the same period, archaeologist Charles Love experimented with a 10-ton replica. His first attempt at rocking it proved too unstable over long distances. He then tried placing the statue upright on 2 sled runners atop log rollers, which allowed 25 men to move it 150 feet in just 2 minutes. Later, research suggested this method could explain the regularly spaced post holes found along the paths over rough terrain. Love proposed that upright posts on either side of the path acted as levers, helping to push the statues uphill or slow them downhill, reducing the need for large numbers of people and providing a practical method for moving these monumental works. Archaeologists Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo have spent years carefully studying the statues that line the ancient roads of Easter Island. Their detailed research suggests that the way the statues were broken, their shape, and the way they were positioned all fit with a fascinating idea. The Moai may have been moved in an upright position. Hunt and Lipo explain that when these massive stone figures were first carved at the quarry, the sculptors left their bases broad and curved along the front edge. This design, they argue, was clever because it allowed the statues to rock forward and sideways as they were moved, creating a kind of walking motion. Evidence of large flakes broken off the sides of the bases supports this theory. Once the Moai reached their final locations and were installed, the wide and curved bases were trimmed down